Well, good morning, everyone. I am so glad that you guys are here. I want to start by wishing all the moms out there a happy Mother's Day. Just really glad that you're here. It's awesome to see families coming to church together and just spending time in God's house as we celebrate something like Mother's Day. Today, we are jumping into a series that we started just last week. The title of the new series is called Unfinished Business, and it really is a study or a look at the Old Testament book of Nehemiah. Now, I just want to start the message today with a question that I want to ask everybody to think about. It doesn't matter if you're in the room with me, those watching online, everyone who's hanging out in the chapel. I want you to think about this question. Have you ever looked at a situation in your world and you've had this thought run through your mind? Somebody needs to do something about that. Probably a lot of us have had that thought roll through our mind. Maybe there was a need to meet. Maybe we were looking at something in our world and we saw a problem to solve. Maybe it was an injustice to correct, or maybe there was just someone in your world who needed help. But you saw it, and when you saw it, you immediately thought to yourself, somebody needs to do something about that. My buddy John, he found himself in that situation a few years ago. I've heard him tell this story a few different times. He was eating in a restaurant, and as he was eating in this restaurant, there was this man in the middle of the restaurant who just stood up and he started begging everyone in the restaurant for help. It became pretty apparent pretty quickly that this man was choking on his food. He couldn't get air. He couldn't say anything. He gave everyone in the restaurant the universal sign for choking. This man was absolutely desperate for help. He couldn't hit his own back with any real force, couldn't really give himself the Heimlich, and so he was literally turning to everyone in the restaurant, begging for someone to stand up and help him. Now, sadly, everyone in the room was thinking the same thing. Somebody needs to do something about it. But for whatever reason, no one did anything. Finally, the bartender from the other room heard the commotion. He ran in, he gave the man the Heimlich, and he saved the man's life. Now, again, my buddy John, I've heard him tell that story a few different times, and every time he tells that story, you can tell that that experience had a profound impact on his life. Every time he tells the story, he always says, I'll never understand why we all just sat there doing nothing while that man struggled for his life. Then John always says this. He says, from now on, if somebody needs to do something, then I'm going to do it. I think most of us have looked at our world at some point, and we have thought to ourselves, somebody needs to do something. We've probably looked at the homeless people in our community. We've probably looked at the trash on the beach. We've probably looked at marriages that are struggling or people who have dug themselves into a financial hole. We've probably looked at people who are battling addictions. We've probably looked at kids who are growing up without a father in their home or maybe even a father in their life. And so we think to ourselves, somebody needs to do something. And there are a lot of people in our world, especially in America, who think the government needs to be the one who does something. But there are some people who look at a situation and they go, the police need to do something. I've heard a lot of people who say things like, I don't understand why God doesn't do something. There are some people who think the church needs to do something. In fact, people come up to us all the time and they say things like, man, Mosaic needs to... And then they tell us what we need to be doing. Now, regardless of who you think needs to step up and do something, we all look at situations in our world and we all think to ourselves, somebody needs to do something. And so my question for us today is simply this. If somebody needs to do something, why don't you do it? Why do you choose to be passive when you could be active? Why do you choose to spend all of your time in all of your life working to make your own life better when you could spend some of the time over some of your life working to make someone else's life better, or maybe even working to make the world better? Jesus wasn't passive. Jesus was active. Jesus didn't spend his life trying to make his life better. He spent his life trying to make other people's lives better, and even trying to make our world better. And so as followers of Jesus, I always wonder, why don't we follow the example of Jesus? Why don't we just step up, and why don't we do something when we see a need? See, here's what I want every single one of you to know today. Your life really could make a big difference. In fact, that is the way in which the God of Scriptures always works. God takes ordinary people and he uses them to do extraordinary things. You see it over and over again all throughout this book. He used a little shepherd boy named David. He used an unwed teenage mother named Mary. Jesus goes out, and he's not going to the teachers of the law or the high priest. He goes after ordinary people. He says, I want some fishermen, I want a doctor, I want a tax collector. These are the people who are going to be on my team, and I'm going to use these ordinary people to do extraordinary things. You see it over and over throughout the Scriptures, and you certainly see it in the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a very ordinary guy. He was not a powerful king. He was not a priest or a prophet. He was a cupbearer or a simple servant. And yet God would use this very ordinary man to pull off an extraordinary thing. The question is, how does something like that happen? How do ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things in their life? That's the lesson that we're going to learn as we get into Nehemiah chapter 2 today. I want to begin with just the first 3 verses. This is what we read. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before, so the king asked me, why does your face look so sad when you are not ill? This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, may the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my ancestors are buried lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Now, I know that we started our study on Nehemiah last week, but we didn't talk a lot about Nehemiah last week. Last week, we talked about the project. We talked about the fact that the city of Jerusalem was in ruins. We talked about their broken city, and we talked about our broken cities. But today, I want to spend a lot more time talking to you about Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah, he was a servant of the king, but more specifically than that, he was the cupbearer of the king. Now, it's kind of a strange occupation that you don't really hear a lot about in our world today, but this was a very important role because people in their day were always trying to find a way to assassinate the king. In fact, most people believe that this king, King Artaxerxes, he became the king because he killed his own brother who was in line for the throne before he was. And so this king was a little bit paranoid. In fact, every king was a little paranoid. And so they had someone who worked for them who was simply known as a cupbearer. A cupbearer had one job. You drink it before the king drinks it, so that if it kills someone and it's been poisoned, then it kills the cupbearer and it doesn't kill our king. Now, because of his job, Nehemiah would have spent a lot of time with the king. He was very loyal to the king. He was a trusted servant of the king, and he was tight with the king. And so this one day, a new wine shipment comes in, And Nehemiah grabs a glass, does his little taste test. He takes it to the king. But when he brings the wine to the king sees something that he has never seen before. Nehemiah was sad. And it was written all over his face. Nehemiah was carrying a heavy burden because Nehemiah had heard about a great need. David Nimitz once said, "The person who wants to make a great difference must first be arrested by a desperate sense of need." There was a great need in Nehemiah's day. The need was to rebuild a city that had been broken by sin. I told you last week, Mosaic, that there is a great need in our day all along the Mississippi Gulf Coast to rebuild cities that have been broken by sin. There are a lot of churches along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, but there are not a lot of churches like Mosaic along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. There are a lot of great churches that are out there, and I really do believe that those churches are great because those churches will reach people that Mosaic Church will never reach. But Mosaic Church is also great because Mosaic Church is reaching a lot of people that those other churches will never reach. I'm telling you, the need here is great. And that need has grabbed a hold of my heart. Sometimes people ask me, "Brandon, are you going to stay at Mosaic in Ocean Springs, or are you going to leave and chase after a better opportunity?" I'm going to tell you, I don't really know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Are there other opportunities out there? Sure. But is there a greater need that is out there? I'm not so sure. I mean, go into cities like Dallas and Denver. Go into cities like Atlanta and Nashville, and what you will see is that there are not just dozens of great churches like Mosaic, there are probably hundreds of great churches just like Mosaic. But if you're driving up and down the Mississippi Gulf Coast and you're looking for a church like Mosaic Church, there may be some, but I'm telling you, there are not many. And because of that, I see a great need all along the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And because the need is great, the burden that I carry is great. And so it was for Nehemiah. Nehemiah heard about the devastation and destruction in Jerusalem, and he had a thought, a crazy thought. He didn't think somebody needs to do something about it. Nehemiah thought to himself, I need to do something about it. He just couldn't figure out how he was going to get it done because he didn't even live in Jerusalem. He was living in the land of Persia. He was over there doing this other job. And so he's hearing about where Jerusalem is and all that's going on in the city and how broken and busted up it is. But he can't figure out, how am I going to get out of this job to go do that job? How am I going to get out of this town so that I can go and take the message of Christ to a new town? Now, he was bummed about it. He was very sad that the king could tell because it was written all over his face. But you need to know this. It was very unusual for Nehemiah to walk around the way he was walking around, because in this context, you do not bring problems to the king. In this context, you only solve problems for the king. You don't do anything to bring him down or to bum him out. Your job is to only do things that will lift his spirits up. And so, at the end of verse 2, the king has questioned Nehemiah about his demeanor. And Nehemiah said, I was very much afraid. Nehemiah knows if this king doesn't like the way you do your job, if this king doesn't like your attitude on the job, he will either terminate you or he will really terminate you, if you know what I'm saying, right? This guy doesn't play games, and so Nehemiah is afraid. But Nehemiah has something going for him that is extremely important. Nehemiah has been loyal. He has been faithful. He has been a servant of the king for many, many years. Think about this. In all of his days working for this king, the king has never seen him sad. He always does his job, and apparently he always does it with a smile on his face. Mosaic, we all need to learn something, not about Nehemiah. We need to learn something from Nehemiah. If you want to know how ordinary people accomplish extraordinary things, it starts right here. You feel a great need. You say, man, my life could make a big difference, but you build favor before you ever need a favor. You spend your life doing your job, doing it in the right way and with the right attitude, and you do it year after year after year after year, so that if the day ever comes when you need a favor, you have already been building favor with the people in your life. Why? Because you live your life like Jesus lived his life, who taught us that it is better to give than to receive. You spent your life giving to others, not taking from others. You lived your life like Jesus, serving others rather than expecting to be served by others. That is how you win favor with the people in the world around you. The wise man in Proverbs, he spoke a lot about the importance of earning favor with God and man. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, he wrote this. He said, let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck and write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of both God and man. Love and faithfulness. You do your job in the right way and with the right attitude and for the right reasons. That's love. You go to work every day. You work hard. You do it right. You're dependable. That's faithfulness. And when you do that, you build all kinds of favor with both God and man. But remember, you better build favor before you ever need a favor. That's what Nehemiah has been doing now for years. Over the course of his career, he showed up for work. He showed up with a smile on his face. Never once did the king see him bummed out or feeling a little down. And so Nehemiah has been building up all kinds of favor with this king. But the other thing you need to know about Nehemiah is that Nehemiah was the kind of man who was willing to take a risk. Think about it. Every day of his life was a risk. I'm going to drink it, and I don't know if it's got poison in it or not. This dude is a risk taker. At the end of verse 2, Nehemiah said, I was very much afraid in this situation. Why? Because he knew the king could put an end to my career. He could put an end to my life. But Nehemiah is not the kind of man who lives in the safe zone or lives in the comfort zone. Nehemiah is a man who lives on the edge, and he is willing to take a risk. He knows if somebody needs to do something, then I'm going to do it. He spent years of his life building relationship with this king and building favor with this king. And so he was going to take a risk, not so that he could get something for himself, but so that he could do something great for God and for others. If you really want your life to make a difference, if you really want to be the kind of ordinary person who does extraordinary things, yeah, you take a risk, but you don't take a risk for yourself. You take a risk for God and for others. And so my question for you is, when's the last time you took a risk for God? When's the last time you cut a big check? When's the last time you signed up to serve and you made a long-term commitment? When's the last time you shared your faith or you invited someone to church with you? Don't just live life taking a risk for yourself. If you want to do something great, you live life taking a risk for God and for others. See, building a Harrison County campus is not about doing something great for us. It's about doing something great for God, and it's all about doing something great for other people. You take a risk for yourself and it pays off. Great for you. That's temporary. You take a risk for God and for others, that is eternal. And that's what we're doing in Harrison County. And that's why I really do believe that God is going to bless this project just like He blessed Nehemiah and his project. Nehemiah takes a big risk. He gets way outside of his comfort zone. This dude is thinking about doing something that he has never done before. In verse 3, Nehemiah explained to the king, the reason I'm so brokenhearted, the reason I'm sad and carrying a heavy burden is because the city where my ancestors are buried, it lies in ruins. So in verse 4, the king said, what do you want? At the end of verse 4, Nehemiah said, so I prayed to the God of heaven. Nehemiah knew that this moment in time was a defining moment in his life, and it was a defining moment for the nation of Israel. And so before he asked the king for anything, he prayed to the God of heaven. He throws up this quick little prayer, then he answered the king. I want you to listen to what he asked of this king. According to verses 5 and 6, he asked for time off. I got to get out of this job and out of this town, and I got to go back to Jerusalem. Now, I need you to know something. This project ended up taking somewhere between 10 and 12 years. So he asked for some time off. Verse 7, he asked for letters so that he could travel safely through foreign lands as he made his way back to Jerusalem. According to verse 8, he knew he was going to need great timber to rebuild the city gates, and he wanted the best timber he could find. So he said, King, I want timber, and I want it right out of your forest. And then according to verse 9, they threw in a few army officers and an entire cavalry to travel with him. Guys, think about what he's asking. Can you imagine going to your boss tomorrow morning and say, hey, I want 10 years off PTO? Okay, I don't just want time off, I want it paid time off. He would say, you can have 10 years off and you can have the rest of your life off. You're not working here anymore, right? That's what this guy's asking for. He also wants a letter of recommendation. He wants materials and manpower, all so that he can go to work for someone else. Now, I don't know what you think of when you hear all that he's asking, but I'm going to tell you what I thought. I thought this last week, I thought, the cupbearer has been taste testing too much of the king's wine, if you know what I'm saying. That this dude is drunk if he thinks that this ungodly king is going to give him all of that. But listen to me. Nehemiah is not drunk. Nehemiah is a man who lives with crazy faith. He believes that God has put this vision in his heart. He believes that if God put this vision in my heart, then God's going to give me everything I need to do what He has called me to do. In fact, if you look back in verse 8, he said, because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, the king granted my requests. Okay, hold on. Why did the king grant his requests? Because the gracious hand of my God was all over me. And so the question for us, Mosaic, is simply this. Is the hand of God on Mosaic Church or not? Because if His hand is not on us, Harrison County is not going to work, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you, Ocean Springs is not going to work for very long at all. This thing is going to crumble, it will crash, and it will burn. But if the hand of God is all over this church, then we are getting ready to be a part of a story that only God can write. If His hand is really on this church, then we're getting ready to see God do something that we could never do on our own. We're getting ready to be a part of something that is bigger than all of us combined. And I'm going to tell you, I really do believe that God's hand is all over this church. When I look at the way our church is growing, when I look at the number of people who are putting their faith in Christ and are being baptized, when I hear the stories of life change that are taking place, when I see all of the pieces of the puzzle falling strategically into place, I can only reach one conclusion. The gracious hand of our God is upon us. And if God is really at work, and if you are really the kind of person who wants your life to matter and you want to make a great difference and you want to be the ordinary man or woman who is a part of an extraordinary thing, then you need to get in on what God's doing. Henry Blackaby once said it like this. He said, if you want to be a part of the great work that God is doing, then you need to look around your world and you need to see where God is working. And then you need to go and you need to join Him in that work. God's hand is all over Nehemiah. And so Nehemiah gets the time that he needs. Nehemiah gets the resources that he needs, and he heads to Jerusalem. Now, first thing that he does when he gets to Jerusalem is he gathers information. So important if you're ever trying to accomplish anything big. In business, in life, in the local church, he's gathering information. Data-driven decisions. Look at verses 11 to 13. He said this, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there for 3 days, I sat out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate. I want to make a poop joke right now, but I'm not going to, okay? He's examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Now, if you continue to read verse 14, verse 15, and even into verse 16, what you see Nehemiah doing is he is examining as much of this wall as he possibly can. The people in the city of Jerusalem, they don't even know why he's there yet. This dude, he has a desire to do the work, but before he ever starts the work, he is first counting the cost. He's assessing, do we really have what it takes to start and to finish the great work that God is calling us to do? Jesus taught something very similar. Luke chapter 14, 28 to 30, Jesus said this, suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you first sit down and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? For if you lay the foundation and you're not able to finish it, everyone who sees it will ridicule you, saying, this person began to build and wasn't able to finish. And I'm going to tell you right now, Mosaic, that right there is what is keeping me up at night. I look at that right there, and I think to myself, just because God has put a desire in me doesn't mean we have the dedication to pull it off. And so every week, when I come into my office, one of the first things I do is I ask Jonna, my assistant, how many people are signed up for the Harrison County Core Team and how many people are signed up as new volunteers in the Ocean Springs campus. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out how many new people are volunteering here so that we can backfill all those people who are heading over to Harrison County. And over and over and over again, what I hear from my team is this. People say they're committed. People say that they're all in, but they haven't signed up. Right now, I am gathering information. I am trying to discern how many people do we have going? Do we have what it takes to start and to sustain this great work that God is calling us to do. And that in large part, Mosaic, it hinges on you, just like it hinged on them in Nehemiah's day. You see, Nehemiah did not just need the favor of God and the favor of a king. He needed boots on the ground. He needed help from the people who were living in the city of Jerusalem. He's got a dream, but now he needs a dream team. And so in verse 17, he gives the people the greatest opportunity of their life. He gives these people an opportunity to join the team and to be a part of the great work that God is doing to rebuild the city of Jerusalem, the city where Jesus would come and the city where Jesus would die. Verse 17, come, let us rebuild the wall in Jerusalem so that we will no longer be in disgrace. This is an incredible opportunity. But do you know why they chose to get in on this important project? They could tell that this is not just a good thing. This is a God thing. If you go back and look in verse 18 for yourself, you will read that when they heard that the gracious hand of God was on Nehemiah, they eventually replied and they said, then let us start rebuilding. And so they began the good work. If you really want your life to make a difference, there are a lot of good things that you can do. But there are very few God things that you could do. These people were ready to go because this was a God thing, and they finally had a leader who said, if something needs to be done, then we are going to do it. We're not going to sit around anymore feeling sorry for ourselves. We're not going to sit around looking at our broken down walls and our burned up gates. We're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to fix whatever is broken in this town. Mosaic, if something needs to be done, then we need to be the people who step up and do it. Nehemiah didn't hear about Jerusalem and said, let me think about it, let me pray about it. Nehemiah was the guy who said, let's do it. I don't even need to pray about it. God's put me here and I can do something about it. And that's got to be our attitude. There is a need in Harrison County, and so collectively we're going to be people who do something about it. Is it risky? You bet it's risky. I talk to our elders all the time about the risk. But is it worth the risk? You better believe it's worth the risk. That there is nothing greater we could give our lives to than connecting people to the eternal message of Jesus Christ. That there is nothing you can give your life to that is greater than reconnecting people to their Creator. There's nothing like seeing people who find forgiveness and healing. There's nothing like seeing people who have been freed from guilt and shame and they've been filled up with all kinds of hope and love and mercy. It's always worth it when you're doing that kind of work. And so we will not be the kind of church who sits idly by when there are people all over the Gulf Coast who need to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. We have the answers to the greatest challenges that our world is facing. We are the salt of the earth. We are the city on a hill. We are the light in a world of darkness, and we have been called to share that with everyone we can. The only question is, where do we start? And we'll give you two things and then let you go. Number one, either commit to the Harrison County Core Team or join a volunteer team here in Ocean Springs. I believe that a lot of people are going to end up going to Harrison County. But we want a strong presence in both communities. And that means that we need everyone to get involved in the great work that God is calling us to do. And so for you, that may be joining a prayer team. It may be serving on the weekends. It may be helping out with student ministry, leading a small group, inviting friends to church, giving generously. Do whatever God is telling you to do, but do something so that you can make your life matter, so that you can be a part of the great thing that God is going to do to transform the Gulf Coast. Number two, I want you to start doing for the one what you wish you could do for everyone. Sometimes you look around the brokenness in our world and it starts to feel a little bit overwhelming. There's so many needs that it starts to feel like I couldn't possibly do anything to make a difference. I'm going to tell you right now, God may not use you to change the whole world. But if you will do for one what you wish you could do for everyone, God will use you to change someone's world. And because you're being used to change someone's world, God starts to change the Mississippi Gulf Coast one person at a time. But if we all get this, and we all get on board with what I'm talking about, if we all start doing for one what we wish we could do for everyone, then God doesn't change the Mississippi Gulf Coast one person at a time. He changes the Mississippi Gulf Coast 2,000 people at a time. That is the kind of potential that is contained in Mosaic Church. And it's time to unleash that potential on the Gulf Coast, because Mosaic, if something needs to be done, then we will be the people who step up to do it. Will you pray with me? God, I pray that your word would just settle on the hearts of people. I pray, God, that people would see that this may be the greatest opportunity of their life. Better than any business deal they ever got to be a part of. Better than any vacation they got to take. Better than any project they ever worked on. God, this is an opportunity to do something that has eternal consequences. And so, God, I pray that you would just take this message. I pray, God, that you would fire up your people and that you would cause us to be people who stop looking at our world thinking, man, somebody needs to do something. And I pray, God, that you would put in our hearts that if somebody needs to do something, then we are going to do it. God, unleash your people. Change the Gulf Coast. Bring people to saving knowledge of Jesus Christ so that they can find the hope that they need and the change that they long for. I pray it all in Christ's name. Amen.